I'm not sure if you know this about me, but I love sugar. Like, I have a sweet tooth in general. Give me all the cookies, give me all the sweets. But what I love even more than that is learning about the dark history of everyday things. There's a series called The Dark History of Everyday Things, which basically blends psychology, economics, and history to tell you about the things we use every day. Today, we're going to talk about one of my favorite things ever, sugar. In 2017, somebody did a TEDx presentation called How Sugar Changed the World. And he starts it off by saying, sugar is an incredible thing. It makes everything better. It can make your food taste better, your sex life better. And many people believe it has the power to make the world a better place. Now, as you know, the speaker goes on to explain how sugar actually did change the world, but not in the way you might expect. It turns out that there are a lot of myths about sugar and its history, including some pretty widespread misconceptions. One of those misconceptions is that sugar came from India. I guess that makes sense because, India and rice are kind of linked together in people's minds. However, sugar cane actually originated in Papua New Guinea and then traveled through Indonesia and Malaysia before eventually making its way into India. Now, when sugar did enter India, they added a completely new process to it, which was sort of boiling the sugarcane juice with lime. This produced a kind of brown sugar, which was much more concentrated than the white sugar that comes to mind when thinking about sugar today. Eventually, this type of sugar made its way into Africa. One thing that is important to note about sugar at this time was that it was still not considered a staple or something that should be consumed daily. In fact, it was seen as a luxury item and was used primarily for medicinal purposes or for special occasions. So, because it was so expensive, it actually led to the creation of the first futures market in the city of Zanzibar. Around this time, though, sugar had also made its way to Europe, where it would eventually become a staple, but not quite yet. You see, around this time, Europeans were obsessed with spices and getting them from Asia. And because of this, many European countries started exploring and conquering new lands in the Caribbean. This is where sugar would really start to take off. After European countries started building plantations in the Caribbean, they brought over African slaves to work on them. And because these plantations required so many workers, they ended up being the largest slave operations in the history of the Americas. At this time, sugar had started to really evolve into a staple good. The demand for sugar kept rising, and because of this, they started to grow sugar beets as well. While the production of beet sugar was slower, it did last longer and could be produced in harsher climates, which helped spread its popularity across Europe. So now we have the perfect storm. We have high demand, we have slave labor, and we have the perfect product that can be mass-produced. Well, at least for the Europeans. You see, while sugar was becoming cheaper and more accessible, it was still extremely expensive for poor people in Europe. And it wasn't until the Industrial Revolution that sugar prices would drop enough for the average person to consume on a regular basis. But what does the science say? Is sugar really that bad for you? A lot of studies done on rats show that sugar causes activity in the reward center of the brain and that it triggers dopamine release. However, humans are a little different because, well, we don't live the same way rats do. And a lot of research suggests that it's not the sugar itself, but instead the frequency of consumption that leads to addiction. One theory about why humans are able to eat large amounts of sugar without feeling sick is because our bodies are constantly trying to maintain homeostasis. Because of this, it can actually be difficult to detect when you're consuming too much of a good thing. But even if we do realize we've consumed too much of something, another psychological principle takes over, which is the idea of loss aversion. This is why we hate throwing things away, even if we know we don't need them. When it comes to sugar, this means that if we buy a bag of candy, we feel compelled to eat it all even if we know we shouldn't, simply because we paid for it. And here's where things get interesting. Even though we may feel awful after consuming too much sugar, like let's say you ate the whole bag of Skittles, and now you have a stomachache, psychologically speaking, we only learn from the peak moments of an experience, meaning that we won't really associate the stomachache with the Skittles. Instead, we'll just remember how good they tasted. So now we have a product that's cheap, easy to consume, and psychologically designed to be addictive. But there's another factor that makes it even harder to stop consuming sugar, and that's marketing. In the early 1900s, brands realized that sugar tasted great, but it didn't really do anything. And if they wanted to sell more of it, they had to add value to the product. And the best way to do that was to make products for children. This is why some of the biggest brands in the world are so good at marketing to kids. A lot of the biggest brands spend millions developing a brand image and creating emotional connections with their customers, especially children. So if you think about it, sugar is really just the Trojan horse that gets the bigger brands into your house. But if that isn't enough, there's one more tactic that brands use to make you crave their product: scarcity. Have you ever noticed how sometimes at restaurants you'll see a line for one dessert but not another? That's no coincidence. Brands want you to feel like if you don't buy their product, you're missing out. And brands do this in two ways. The first is physically limiting how much of a product there is. For example, maybe they'll only have 3 options of a certain pastry left. The second way is by limiting your time to purchase the item. This is why limited time offers exist. They want you to feel like you're missing out if you do not buy the product right away. So, between the addictive nature of sugar, the psychological tricks brands use, and the fact that it's always so accessible, it's no wonder why so many people struggle to limit their sugar intake. Another interesting part about sugar is that it was one of the main driving forces behind the economy during the 1600s to the 1800s. Between the high demand, the slave labor, and the profits involved, it's estimated that over 12 million Africans were shipped across the Atlantic to work on sugar plantations in the Americas. It's also estimated that the Portuguese alone made over 300 years' worth of profits from sugar. During this time period, it was common for families to reinvest all of their money back into the business. This meant that if you were one of the original investors, you could keep seeing returns for generations without having to do any work. However, the riches wouldn't last forever because eventually other goods would start to take over. Alcohol was one of the first competitors to sugar. When alcohol became more popular, the price of sugar started to fall. But this didn't last long because eventually tea and coffee would take over alcohol as the main drink of choice. But you might be wondering, who drank alcohol during this time? Wasn't it only poor people? Well, it turns out that the top 1% of the population drank more alcohol than everyone else combined. At the time, it was seen as the classy thing to do. And because sugar was so expensive, it was hard to mix it with alcohol without going broke. As time went on, the cost of sugar continued to fall. And in the late 1800s, it would become a common household item. But the problem was that because of the Industrial Revolution, refined carbohydrates like white flour and processed foods were also becoming cheaper. This meant that consumers could now get their quick energy fix from a variety of sources. If you were working a typical job during this time, you could easily go to work and eat bread for lunch, snack on some crackers during the afternoon slump, and then eat some cake for dessert. By the end of the day, you would have consumed a ridiculous amount of refined sugars and carbs. Not only that, but thanks to innovations like canning and freezing, it was now easier than ever to find sugar-filled meals at any time of the year. So, between the excess supply of sugar, the rise of processed foods, and the invention of ultra-processed foods, sugar consumption has skyrocketed. Some studies suggest that humans weren't meant to consume more than 25 grams of sugar per day, but the average American consumes nearly 85 grams. That's 3 times what humans were originally meant to consume. But it doesn't stop there. In 2018, it was found that 1 in 4 Americans are consuming over 100 grams of sugar per day. That's 4 times what humans were originally meant to consume. And of course, these numbers aren't unique to America. Countries like Australia, Canada, and the UK are very similar. So, next time you reach for that cookie or chocolate bar, just remember you're continuing a legacy that dates back hundreds of years. And that's a quick summary of the dark history of sugar. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button. Also, make sure to check out my video on the dark history of pizza dough, which talks about how unhealthy ingredients have been in food since the beginning of time. Thanks for watching, and until next time.